Thanks, John. Pleasure to be here.
Our topic today is modernizing dietary supplement regulations. And there's a lot of attention right now on something called mandatory product listing, or MPL, for dietary supplements. And in fact, a bill was just introduced 2 days ago by Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois and Senator Mike Braun of Indiana that would require manufacturers of dietary supplements to list their products with the FDA, including and we will definitely get into that topic. I want to get into that topic today because it's really timely. But Michael, actually benefit consumers and that they actually advance public health. And with those goals in mind, I'd just like to
John, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, my old friend John Benninger. We have been at it for quite some time. I appreciate that the theme here today is focused on consumers. How do we best support our neighbors, there are families? That's who uses dietary supplements. That's who rely on it, having informed access to diet. American Herbal Products Association, we're not limited to come from traditions like TCM and Ayurveda and numerous indigenous cultures. In fact, these consumers, these friends, neighbors, families, that's really who we work for. John, you and I both have some experience in the industry. We were both on the manufacturing marketing side at some point, and we knew that bottom line, but we've always been focused on whether we were in the manufacturing side or now you in the media. We're very focused on consumer access, so I want to share some ideas about how we can modernize. If I could, I know there's a lot of attention. Dell, if you would pull up the slide number 1. Okay, great. So this provision in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act places significant restrictions on access to certain natural substances under certain conditions. And rather than read this to you, though, let me summarize it. Under these provisions, any ingredient that meets the definition of the ingredients allowed in dietary supplements, so vitamins, minerals, herbs and other botanicals, amino acids, and other substances found in the food supply, these provisions establish that if any such ingredient or article is already in the market in a dietary supplement, and then a pharmaceutical company develops a drug with the same article, then we can share the marketplace. On the other hand, if the article is approved as or authorized for investigation as a new drug before the article was included in a dietary supplement, then the drug industry, the drug company, gets exclusivity against dietary supplements forever. That's clearly imbalanced. Why would we have one of the parties that wants to bring products to consumers able to have exclusivity if they get there first, and the other ready to share the market if a drug comes along? So if you could show the next slide, Del. And this is an early example of the application of these provisions when FDA in 1998 forced the product Colestin from the market. So this is almost 24 years ago. Note here FDA's statement. The law is intended to maintain incentives for companies to establish the clinical safety and efficacy of drug products. Fair enough. We need the drug industry to be incentivized. They bring important new drugs that also support the health of our friends, families, neighbors. But this was the focus of the removal of this red yeast rice product standardized to a certain level of lovastatin. Look, there are other problems with other details on that case that we would have to get into to study it further, but I'm just pointing out this was the first time this provision was applied. We continue to see the application of these same provisions, most recently for N-acetylcysteine or NAC, probably most broadly to CBD for cannabidiol. So this is the part of the law that FDA has referenced since at least 2015 to support its position that CBD is not a lawful ingredient in dietary supplements. By the way, there is a related provision under the food section of the law, so we're also restricted from including CBD in food products like herbal teas. And also, by the way, FDA has the authority to grant an exception. It hasn't used that authority ever, and we have been asking them to do this specifically for CBD since at least 2018. If you would move to the next slide, and let me repeat from FDA's statement from the agency's Colestin press release, the law is intended to maintain incentives for companies to establish the clinical safety and efficacy of drug products. As I mentioned earlier, if an article is already in the market as a dietary supplement, for example, fish oil, when a drug is developed from the same article, we can share the market. Here's an example. Fish oil has long been sold as a dietary supplement. Now there's a drug product option. So apparently, the pharmaceutical company that sought approval of its fish oil as a drug was sufficiently incentivized to do so. So one other detail that I'd like to add that I think further focuses on the imbalance in this part of the law. A new drug derived from a natural ingredient has exclusivity against dietary supplements forever, but its exclusivity against generic drugs lasts only a few years. So the further imbalance, I think, is evident. We want to challenge this part of the law, and we can do so. If we can do so successfully, we would remove restrictions on access to the naturally derived articles that have been affected by these provisions to date. So again, NAC, CBD, high quality red yeast rice products, and to others that might be affected in the future. And I want to pause here just for a moment to say what we're not saying is, shouldn't we be able to market every new drug that comes to market as a dietary supplement? Of course not. A mineral, an amino acid, an herb or other botanical, and there's a lot of drug research on those particular, especially botanicals, that we shouldn't be restricted from offering the same product. Deserves challenge. We think it's an obstruction. Dietary supplements as consumers want. If we could move. This is a provision in the law that restricts distribution of information related to dietary supplement products, even truthful and non-misleading information. You can see that this removes from the definition of labeling a publication, say a journal article on research on a natural product, so long as it's physically separate from products that contain the researched ingredients. But if it's not physically separate, then it becomes labeling. This labeling exemption goes away, and then FDA can assert that the information in the article constitutes a drug claim. Essentially, that puts companies in a position where if they do research, for example, let me say saw palmetto, on the effectiveness of saw palmetto on symptoms of benign prostatic hypertrophy, and they find that it shows improvement on those symptoms, they can't tell anybody. They can't provide that information unless they physically separate it from the products. So again, NAPA thinks we should challenge this and seek to change this provision. And in so doing, we would improve education on dietary supplements. And this physically separate, this was part of the DSHEA provisions, the DSHEA amendments to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act that occurred in 1994. That might have made sense in 1994. I remember going into health food stores and the supplements were over here, and there tended to be a reading room over there, the physically separate. All of our purchases, which is still what we do mean, I can get the information from Google. I can get it from a Wikipedia search. I just can't get it from the one. Even aside from the physically separate or not, if we move it back to brick and mortar in 2022, we need to get over the idea that the American consumers aren't sufficiently intelligent to understand access to this information, or you've just been tricked into buying, misinformed or un. We've established as a legislative priority. We'd like to change this. We're talking to others in the industry.
That's the standard, you know.
Yeah.
If what you want to say, regardless of who is saying it, is truthful, that I want to make sure we get to. And for those out there in the audience tuning in, feel free to submit your questions at any time here. Submit your questions, just type them in, send them in. We'll get to as many of them as we can. For precedents to have
addressed in the N-acetylcysteine issue, the criteria that's used, drug discovery company, meet certain criteria. It has to have received authorization from FDA. Public, I can't hide that. But when those criteria are met,